Jessica Martinez had always been fascinated by the hum of aircraft engines. At 28, she worked as a flight instructor at Riverside Aviation, a small flight school nestled between rolling hills and endless blue skies. Every morning, she arrived at the hangar with the same excitement she'd felt on her first solo flight 7 years ago. Today felt different, though she couldn't explain why. The morning sun cast long shadows across the tarmac as Jessica performed her pre-flight inspection on the Cessna 172. Her student for the day was Robert Chen, a 62-year-old retired engineer who had decided to fulfill his lifelong dream of becoming a pilot. Robert had been flying with Jessica for 6 months, and today marked his first cross-country navigation flight. "Beautiful morning for flying," Robert said, approaching the aircraft with his flight bag slung over his shoulder. His enthusiasm was infectious, despite his methodical, engineering approach to everything aviation-related. Jessica smiled, checking the fuel tanks one more time. Perfect conditions. Light winds, clear skies, and excellent visibility. "You picked a good day for your navigation test." They had planned a route from Riverside to Meadowbrook Airport, approximately 150 miles northeast. The flight would take them over varied terrain including farmland, small towns, and, eventually into mountainous regions near their destination. For Robert, this represented a significant milestone in his training. For Jessica, it was another opportunity to watch a student gain confidence and skills. As they settled into the cockpit, Jessica reviewed the flight plan with Robert. "Remember, today you're pilot in command for the navigation portions. I'm here for safety and guidance, but this is your flight. Trust your training and the instruments." Robert nodded, his hands steady as he went through the startup checklist. Despite his age, he had proven to be one of Jessica's most dedicated students. His engineering background helped him understand the technical aspects of flying, but he sometimes overthought simple procedures. The engine came to life with its familiar rumble. Robert contacted ground control, received taxi clearance, and carefully maneuvered the aircraft toward the runway. Jessica watched his technique, noting improvements in his confidence and decision-making since their first lesson. Riverside Tower, Cessna 739 Delta Mike, ready for departure, northeast departure approved. Robert spoke into his headset with growing confidence. Cessna 739 Delta Mike, wind 090 at 8, runway 09, cleared for takeoff, came the response from the tower. As they climbed through 3,000 feet, Jessica felt that familiar sense of freedom that only came with leaving the ground behind. The landscape below transformed into a patchwork quilt of green and brown fields, connected by ribbons of highways and dotted with small communities. Robert was doing well, maintaining altitude and heading while monitoring his navigation instruments. They had been flying for about 45 minutes when Jessica noticed he seemed quieter than usual. Normally, Robert would point out landmarks or ask technical questions about the aircraft systems. "How are you feeling, Robert?" she asked, glancing at her student. "Fine, just concentrating on the navigation," he replied, but Jessica detected something different in his voice. She had learned to read her students' moods and stress levels, and something seemed off. They were cruising at 5,500 feet, well above the rolling hills below, when Robert suddenly slumped forward against his harness. His hands fell away from the controls, and the aircraft immediately began to lose altitude and drift off course. "Robert!" Jessica called out, but received no response. She quickly reached over and felt for a pulse at his neck. It was weak and irregular. Robert appeared to be unconscious, possibly having suffered a heart attack or stroke. In that instant, Jessica's training kicked in. She had practiced emergency procedures hundreds of times, but never imagined she would face a real medical emergency at 5,500 feet with an unconscious pilot slumped over the controls. Her first priority was gaining control of the aircraft. She took the yoke in her right hand while using her left to push Robert back against his seat, away from the instrument panel. The Cessna had been trimmed for level flight, but, without control inputs, it was beginning to descend and turn. "Mayday, mayday, mayday," Jessica transmitted over the radio. "This is Cessna 739 Delta Mike, approximately 15 miles southwest of Meadowbrook, pilot incapacitated, requesting immediate assistance." The response came quickly. "Cessna 739 Delta Mike, this is Kansas City Center, we copy your mayday. What is the nature of the emergency? My student appears to have suffered a medical emergency and is unconscious. I am a flight instructor and have control of the aircraft, but I need to land immediately, Jessica replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Cessna 739 Delta Mike, understand pilot incapacitated, instructor has control. What is your current position and altitude? Jessica quickly checked her GPS and instruments. We're about 12 miles southwest of Meadowbrook at 4,800 feet and descending. I need vectors to the nearest suitable airport. While maintaining radio contact with air traffic control, Jessica assessed Robert's condition. He was breathing, but remained unconscious. She tried calling his name and gently shaking his shoulder, but got no response. Time was critical, she needed to get him medical attention as quickly as possible. The air traffic controller's voice remained calm and professional. Cessna 739 Delta Mike, Meadowbrook Airport is your closest option, bearing 045 degrees, 12 miles. They are alerting emergency services now. Can you maintain altitude? Affirmative, I can maintain altitude and navigate to Meadowbrook, Jessica responded, already turning the aircraft toward the airport. As she flew toward Meadowbrook, Jessica's mind raced through everything she needed to do. She had to ensure Robert remained stable, maintain control of the aircraft, communicate with air traffic control, and prepare for an emergency landing. Her hands moved efficiently across the instrument panel, adjusting power settings and trim to maintain stable flight. The landscape below began to look more familiar as they approached the area around Meadowbrook Airport. Jessica could see the runway in the distance, a reassuring sight that represented safety and medical help for Robert. Cessna 739 Delta Mike, Meadowbrook Tower has you in sight. You're cleared straight in approach to runway 27, emergency vehicles are standing by, came the transmission. Jessica acknowledged the clearance and began her descent toward the airport. Robert remained unconscious but was still breathing steadily. She checked his pulse again, it seemed stronger than before, which gave her hope. As they descended through 2,000 feet, Jessica ran through her landing checklist while continuously monitoring Robert's condition. She had performed this approach to Meadowbrook several times during her training, but never under these circumstances. The runway grew larger in the windscreen as they descended. Jessica could see the red trucks and ambulances positioned near the runway, ready to provide assistance as soon as they landed. The sight of the emergency vehicles reminded her of the gravity of the situation, but also provided comfort knowing help was waiting. Cessna 739 Delta Mike, you're looking good on approach. How is your passenger? Asked the tower controller. Still unconscious but breathing. I'm configured for landing and should be on the ground in about 2 minutes, Jessica replied, adjusting power and flap settings for the final approach. The aircraft crossed the runway threshold at the correct speed and altitude. Jessica focused on making a smooth landing, knowing that a hard touchdown could potentially worsen Robert's condition. The main wheels touched down gently, followed by the nose wheel, and she applied gentle braking to slow the aircraft. Cessna 739 Delta Mike, nice job, turn left at the first taxiway and proceed to the ramp area near the emergency vehicles, instructed the tower. As Jessica taxied toward the waiting paramedics, she felt a mixture of relief and continued concern. She had successfully handled the emergency and gotten Robert to medical help, but his condition remained unknown. The aircraft came to a stop, and she immediately shut down the engine as paramedics rushed toward their position. Over here, Jessica called out as she opened the cabin door. He's been unconscious for about 15 minutes. I think it might be a heart attack or stroke. The paramedics quickly took over Robert's care, checking his vital signs and beginning to prepare him for transport to the hospital. One of the EMTs asked Jessica about the timeline of events and Robert's condition during the flight. While the medical team worked, Jessica secured the aircraft and gathered both her and Robert's belongings. She watched as they carefully moved Robert from the aircraft to a stretcher, relieved to see that he appeared to be regaining some consciousness. A local aviation safety inspector approached Jessica as the ambulance departed. That was excellent work up there. Can you walk me through what happened? Jessica provided a detailed account of the emergency, from the moment Robert became unresponsive to their landing at Meadowbrook. The inspector took notes and assured her that her actions had likely saved Robert's life. As the afternoon sun began to sink lower in the sky, Jessica found herself alone at the unfamiliar airport, processing what had just occurred. Her hands finally began to shake slightly as the adrenaline wore off, and she realized how serious the situation had been. She called her supervisor at Riverside Aviation to report the incident and arrange for someone to help her return the aircraft home. She also tried calling Robert's wife, Sarah, but realized she didn't have her contact information with her. The airport manager approached her with a cup of coffee and offered to help her contact Robert's family. Through the flight school's records, they were able to reach Sarah and inform her of the situation. Jessica spoke with her briefly, assuring her that Robert was receiving excellent medical care and that the doctors would have more information soon. As Jessica waited for arrangements to be made for her return flight, she reflected on her training and how it had prepared her for this moment. All those hours practicing emergency procedures, learning to stay calm under pressure, and developing the skills to handle unexpected situations had culminated in this real-world test. The sun was setting by the time another instructor from Riverside Aviation arrived to fly back with Jessica. As they prepared for the return flight, she took one last look at the Cessna that had safely carried them through the emergency. Tomorrow, she knew, would bring new students, new flights, and new challenges, but today had reminded her of the profound responsibility that came with being a flight instructor. The flight back to Riverside was quiet and reflective. Jessica thought about Robert, hoping he was stable and would recover fully. She also thought about the importance of emergency training and how critical it was for all pilots to be prepared for the unexpected. As they touched down at Riverside Airport under the stars, Jessica felt grateful for her training, her abilities, and the positive outcome of what could have been a tragic situation. She knew that Robert's recovery was still uncertain, but she had done everything possible to give him the best chance. 3 days after the emergency landing, Jessica sat in the hospital waiting room, holding a bouquet of flowers from the entire flight school staff. Sarah Chen had called that morning to let her know that Robert was conscious and asking to see her. The doctors had confirmed he had suffered a mild heart attack during the flight, but his prognosis was good. The sterile hospital corridors felt strange after spending so much time in the open cockpits and wide skies. Jessica found Robert's room and knocked gently on the door. When Sarah opened it, her eyes were red from crying, but she was smiling. "Jessica, thank you for coming. Robert has been asking about you constantly," Sarah said, embracing her warmly. "The doctors say if you hadn't gotten him here so quickly, things could have been much worse." Robert was sitting up in bed, looking pale but alert. Various monitors beeped softly around him, and he had an 4-line in his arm. When he saw Jessica, his face lit up despite his obvious fatigue. "There's my instructor," he said with a weak smile. "I hear I missed quite an exciting landing." Jessica laughed, relief flooding through her at seeing Robert conscious and speaking. "You gave me quite a scare up there. How are you feeling?" "Like I got hit by a truck, but the doctors say I'm going to be fine. They want to keep me here for a few more days to monitor my heart, but no permanent damage." Robert paused, his expression growing more serious. "Sarah told me what you did. You saved my life." Over the next hour, Jessica filled Robert in on the details of their emergency landing that he couldn't remember. She told him how air traffic control had vectored them to Meadowbrook, how the emergency crews were waiting, and how smoothly everything had gone once they were on the ground. "I remember feeling a bit lightheaded during the flight," Robert said thoughtfully. "I thought it was just nerves about the navigation test. I should have said something." "Don't blame yourself," Jessica replied. "Heart attacks can happen to anyone, and you couldn't have predicted it. The important thing is that you're okay now." Dr. Patel, Robert's cardiologist, knocked and entered the room. She was a young woman with kind eyes and a confident manner that immediately put everyone at ease. "Mr. Chen, how are you feeling this afternoon?" she asked, checking his chart. "Much better, thank you. Dr. Patel, this is Jessica, the flight instructor who got me to the hospital," Robert said. Dr. Patel shook Jessica's hand warmly.
I've heard about your quick thinking. You definitely made a difference in Mr. Chen's outcome.
Getting him medical attention so quickly minimized the damage to his heart muscle. The doctor explained that Robert had experienced what they called a mild myocardial infarction, caused by a blocked coronary artery. The blockage had been cleared through a procedure called angioplasty, and Robert was expected to make a full recovery.
Will he be able to fly again? Jessica asked, knowing this question was weighing heavily on Robert's mind.
That will depend on several factors, Dr. Patel explained. The FAA has specific medical requirements for pilots who have had heart attacks.
Mr. Chen will need to complete a cardiac rehabilitation program and be cleared by both his cardiologist and an FAA-designated medical examiner.
It's not impossible, but it will take time and careful evaluation. After Dr. Patel left, the room fell quiet. Jessica could see the disappointment in Robert's eyes, even though he was trying to hide it. Flying had become such an important part of his life, and the uncertainty about his future as a pilot was clearly troubling him. You know, Jessica said gently, even if the medical certification takes a while, there are other ways to stay involved in aviation. We could always use help at the flight school with ground instruction or maintenance assistance.
Robert nodded, but
Jessica could tell he was still processing everything. Sarah took her husband's hand and squeezed it reassuringly. Over the following weeks, Jessica found herself reflecting deeply on the experience. She had handled the emergency well, but it had changed her perspective on many things. She began paying closer attention to her students' physical condition and stress levels, watching for any signs that might indicate health issues. The incident had also brought her recognition within the aviation community. The local newspaper ran a story about her quick thinking and emergency response. Aviation safety organizations reached out to her about speaking at conferences and training seminars about in-flight medical emergencies. 1 month after the incident, Jessica was back in her normal routine of flight instruction when her supervisor, Mark Williams, called her into his office. Mark was a former airline pilot who had been running Riverside Aviation for 15 years. He was known for his fairness and deep knowledge of aviation training. Jessica, I wanted to talk to you about what happened with Robert Chen, Mark began.
You handled that situation perfectly, and it's got me thinking about our emergency training program. Mark explained that he wanted Jessica to develop a comprehensive program for dealing with in-flight medical emergencies.
Many flight schools taught basic emergency procedures, but few focused specifically on medical situations that could arise during instruction. I'd like you to research best practices, develop training scenarios, and create a curriculum that we can implement here and maybe share with other flight schools, Mark said. What you experienced is rare, but when it happens, instructors need to be prepared.
The project excited Jessica. She began researching medical emergency procedures used by airlines and emergency medical services.
She contacted aviation medical experts, emergency room doctors, and experienced flight instructors who had dealt with similar situations. During her research, Jessica learned that in-flight medical emergencies were more common than she had realized. Heart attacks, strokes, seizures, diabetic emergencies, and severe allergic reactions all occurred in aircraft, though usually in commercial aviation where medical assistance was more readily available. She discovered that general aviation pilots and instructors received minimal training in recognizing and responding to medical emergencies compared to airline crews.
This gap in training could be life-threatening when emergencies occurred in small aircraft far from medical facilities. 2 months after the incident, Robert visited the flight school for the first time since his heart attack. He looked healthier and had been cleared by his doctors to engage in light activities, though his medical certificate remained under review by the FAA. I wanted to see everyone and thank you all for the support, Robert said to the gathered instructors and students. I also wanted to see how Jessica's emergency training program is developing.
Jessica had been working on the program for several weeks and had created initial training modules covering recognition of medical symptoms, basic first aid techniques, emergency communication procedures, and decision-making under pressure. We're calling it the Medical Emergency Response Training, or MERT, Jessica explained to Robert and the group. It covers everything from recognizing early warning signs to managing an unconscious passenger during landing. The program included practical scenarios where instructors would practice handling various medical emergencies while maintaining aircraft control. Jessica had worked with local emergency medical technicians to ensure the medical information was accurate and current. One of the most important aspects of the program was teaching instructors when and how to declare medical emergencies with air traffic control. Jessica had learned that many pilots hesitated to declare emergencies because they feared paperwork or perceived embarrassment, but controllers were trained to help and resources were available. "The key thing I learned," Jessica told the group, "is that you can't be afraid to ask for help. The moment I realized Robert was in trouble, I declared a mayday. The controllers immediately prioritized us and coordinated with emergency services." Robert listened intently to Jessica's presentation. When she finished, he stood up slowly and addressed the group. "I want you all to know that Jessica's quick thinking and training saved my life. If she had hesitated or been unsure of what to do, I might not be here today. This program she's developing could save other lives in the future." The room erupted in applause, and Jessica felt a deep sense of satisfaction. She had turned a frightening experience into something that could benefit the entire aviation community. 3 months after the heart attack, Robert received encouraging news from his cardiologist. His heart function had returned to normal levels, and he had successfully completed his cardiac rehabilitation program. The next step would be applying for a special issuance medical certificate from the FAA. "It might take 6 months or longer," Robert told Jessica during one of his visits to the flight school, "but Dr. Patel thinks I have a good chance of being cleared to fly again." While waiting for his medical clearance, Robert had taken Jessica up on her suggestion and began helping with ground school instruction. His engineering background made him excellent at explaining complex aircraft systems and navigation concepts to new students. Jessica noticed that Robert's experience had given him a unique perspective on aviation safety. He emphasized the importance of pre-flight health assessments and encouraged students to be honest about any physical or mental condition that might affect their flying. The MERT program had gained attention beyond Riverside Aviation. The Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association had asked Jessica to write an article about her experience for their safety publication. Other flight schools were requesting copies of her training materials. Jessica also began receiving invitations to speak at aviation safety seminars and conferences. Her first presentation was at the State Aviation Association's annual meeting, where she addressed an audience of nearly 200 pilots and instructors. "Medical emergencies can happen to anyone, at any time," she told the audience. "The difference between a tragedy and a success story is often just preparation and quick thinking. We train for engine failures and weather emergencies, but how many of us have practiced handling an unconscious pilot?" The response to her presentations was overwhelmingly positive. Many experienced pilots and instructors admitted they had never considered how they would handle a medical emergency during flight. Some shared their own close calls and near-miss situations. One airline pilot approached Jessica after her presentation and told her about a time when his co-pilot had become ill during a transatlantic flight. Although airlines had better medical resources available, the basic principles of assessment, communication, and decision-making were the same. As Jessica continued developing the MERT program, she collaborated with emergency room doctors to understand what information was most helpful when pilots radioed ahead about medical emergencies. This led to the creation of a standardized communication protocol that pilots could use to relay critical information to medical personnel on the ground. The protocol included essential information such as the patient's symptoms, approximate time of onset, current consciousness level, breathing status, and estimated time of arrival. Having this structure helped pilots provide useful information while under stress and helped medical teams prepare appropriate treatment. 6 months after his heart attack, Robert received the news he had been hoping for. The FAA had issued him a special issuance medical certificate that would allow him to resume flying, provided he continued regular cardiac monitoring and followed specific restrictions. "I can fly again," Robert announced to everyone at the flight school, his excitement obvious. "There are some limitations. I need annual cardiac evaluations and I can't fly commercially, but I can finish my private pilot training." Jessica was thrilled for Robert but also nervous about flying with him again. She had developed a deeper awareness of the risks involved in aviation, and the thought of Robert having another medical emergency was concerning. Dr. Patel had assured both Robert and Jessica that with his current treatment and lifestyle changes, the risk of another cardiac event was very low. Robert was taking medications to prevent blood clots and lower his cholesterol, exercising regularly, and following a heart-healthy diet.
"I understand your concerns," Robert told Jessica privately. "But I can't live in fear of what might happen. Flying means too much to me to give it up now.
Besides, I have the best emergency-trained instructor in the state."
Jessica realized that Robert's determination to return to flying was inspiring.
He had faced a life-threatening situation and was choosing to continue pursuing his dream rather than letting fear control his decisions. His attitude reminded her why she loved teaching people to fly in the first place. 8 months after the medical emergency, Jessica stood beside the same Cessna 172 where everything had changed. Robert was completing his pre-flight inspection, moving methodically around the aircraft just as he had before his heart attack. The morning was crisp and clear, perfect flying weather that reminded Jessica of that fateful day. "Ready for this?" she asked, watching Robert check the fuel tanks with the same careful attention to detail that had always characterized his approach to flying.
Robert looked up and smiled. "More ready than I've ever been. I have a new appreciation for every moment in the air." Today marked Robert's return to cross-country flying and his final check ride preparation.
The FAA had cleared him medically, and he had completed several local flights to rebuild his confidence and currency. Both Jessica and Robert felt nervous excitement about this milestone. The flight plan was deliberately similar to their original route to Meadowbrook, though this time they would continue to a third airport before returning home. Robert had specifically requested to fly over the same area where his heart attack had occurred, saying he needed to face the challenge directly. As they settled into the cockpit, Jessica noticed that Robert seemed more relaxed than during his earlier flights after returning. The first few times they had flown together again, both had been hyper-aware of every sensation and change in Robert's condition. Now, several successful flights later, they were beginning to regain their natural rhythm. "Remember, you're pilot in command today," Jessica told Robert as he started the engine. "I'm just along for the ride and to observe your performance for the check ride recommendation."
The takeoff and initial climb proceeded smoothly.
Robert's skills had remained sharp despite his time away from flying, and his radio communications were confident and clear. As they climbed through 3,000 feet, Jessica allowed herself to relax slightly and enjoy the familiar sensation of leaving the Earth behind.
20 minutes into the flight, they approached the area where Robert's medical emergency had occurred.
Jessica found herself scanning Robert's face for any signs of distress, but he appeared calm and focused on his navigation. "You know, I don't remember much about what happened here," Robert said, gesturing toward the landscape below.
"But I remember feeling safe because you were there."
That feeling of trust in my instructor never left me, even when I was unconscious.
The comment touched Jessica deeply.
She had wondered sometimes whether Robert harbored any resentment about the incident or blamed her for not recognizing the warning signs earlier. His words reassured her that their instructor-student relationship had not only survived but grown stronger.
They continued toward their first destination, a small airport nestled among rolling farmland.
Robert's navigation was precise, and he identified checkpoints with confidence.
Jessica made notes on his performance, pleased to see that his skills had not deteriorated during his recovery period. As they descended for landing at the first airport, Jessica reflected on how much had changed since their emergency. The medical emergency response training program she had developed was now being used by 12 flight schools across 3 states. She had been invited to present at the National Association of Flight Instructors Conference and was working on a book about aviation medical emergencies. The landing at the first airport was smooth and professional.
After refueling and filing a flight plan for their next destination, Robert and Jessica took a short break in the airport's pilot lounge.
"How do you feel about everything that's happened?" Jessica asked Robert as they reviewed their next route segment.
"Grateful," Robert replied without hesitation. "Grateful to be alive, grateful for excellent medical care, and grateful for an instructor who saved my life. But also grateful for the perspective it's given me on what's really important." Robert explained that his heart attack had prompted him to re-evaluate many aspects of his life.
He had retired from consulting work to spend more time with Sarah and their grandchildren.
He had also become involved in cardiac rehabilitation programs, helping other heart attack survivors rebuild their confidence and return to activities they loved.
Flying represents freedom and accomplishment to me, Robert continued.
When I thought I might never fly again, I realized how much it meant to me.
Now every flight feels like a gift. Their second takeoff proceeded normally, and they climbed toward their cruise altitude for the longest leg of their journey.
This segment would take them over more challenging terrain, including some hills and less populated areas where emergency landing sites would be limited.
30 minutes into this leg, Robert pointed to a small airport visible in the distance.
"That's where we would have diverted if we'd had an engine failure 5 minutes ago," he said, demonstrating the kind of situational awareness that impressed Jessica.
"Excellent observation," Jessica noted.
"Your emergency planning skills are very strong." This comment led to a discussion about how Robert's medical emergency had heightened his awareness of other potential flight hazards. He had become more methodical about identifying emergency landing sites, checking weather reports, and ensuring adequate fuel reserves.
"I used to think emergency planning was mostly about mechanical failures," Robert admitted. "Now I realize that medical issues, weather changes, or navigation errors can be just as serious. The key is having options and staying ahead of the aircraft." As they approached their second destination, air traffic control advised them of moderate turbulence reported by other aircraft in the area. Robert acknowledged the advisory and began scanning for signs of rough air ahead. "There's some cumulus building up ahead," Jessica observed. "What's your plan?"
"I'd like to request a slight deviation to the south to avoid those clouds," Robert replied. "The turbulence reports suggest it might be uncomfortable, and I'd rather go around than through."
Robert's request for the deviation demonstrated good aeronautical decision-making.
He contacted approach control, explained his request, and received approval for a modified approach path that would keep them in smoother air. The landing at their second destination was more challenging due to crosswinds, but Robert handled it well. He made appropriate control inputs and touched down safely despite the gusty conditions. During their stop at the second airport, they met another instructor and student pilot who were practicing cross-country navigation.
When they learned about Jessica and Robert's story, the instructor asked several questions about medical emergency procedures. "We've all heard about your MERT program," the instructor said to Jessica. "I've been meaning to contact you about bringing that training to our school.
What you experienced with Mr. Chen really opened our eyes to how unprepared we might be for medical emergencies." Jessica provided the instructor with information about implementing the program and emphasized the importance of practicing emergency scenarios regularly. She had learned that knowledge without practice was not sufficient when real emergencies occurred. "The most important thing is staying calm and following your training," Jessica explained. "In Robert's case, I had practiced similar scenarios many times in my mind, so when it happened for real, I knew what to do." The conversation reminded Robert of how his experience had contributed to aviation safety education. Several other pilots had approached him at aviation events to thank him for sharing his story and encouraging better medical emergency training. "I never expected that having a heart attack would lead to helping other pilots," Robert said as they prepared for their final flight segment home. "But if our experience prevents someone else from facing the same situation unprepared, then something positive came from it." The flight home was peaceful and reflective. Robert navigated confidently, communicated clearly with air traffic control, and maintained precise altitude and heading control. Jessica felt proud of his progress and confident that he was ready for his private pilot check ride. As they descended for landing at Riverside Airport, Jessica thought about how this cross-country flight had served as closure for both of them. They had successfully returned to the scene of their emergency and demonstrated that they could handle similar flights safely and professionally. The landing was Robert's best of the day, with a smooth touchdown and rollout. As they taxied to the ramp, Jessica could see Sarah waiting by the terminal building with a big smile and a camera to document Robert's successful return to cross-country flying. "Congratulations, Robert," Jessica said as they shut down the engine. "I think you're ready for your check ride." Your flying skills are excellent, and your decision-making has improved significantly." After securing the aircraft, they walked over to meet Sarah, who had been tracking their progress online through flight tracking websites. She hugged Robert tightly and thanked Jessica again for everything she had done. "I'm so proud of both of you," Sarah said. Robert for having the courage to get back in the cockpit, and Jessica for creating something positive from such a scary experience. That evening, Jessica attended a dinner at the Chun family's home to celebrate Robert's successful return to cross-country flying. Several other pilot friends joined them, creating an impromptu gathering of the local aviation community. During dinner, Robert stood up to make a toast. "I want to thank everyone here for their support during my recovery, but especially Jessica. She didn't just save my life that day, she showed me what it means to be a true professional pilot. Her quick thinking, calm demeanor, and excellent training made the difference between tragedy and triumph." The gathering continued late into the evening, with stories of flying adventures, close calls, and the tight-knit community that aviation creates. Jessica felt a deep sense of satisfaction knowing that Robert was not only flying again but had become an advocate for aviation safety and medical emergency preparedness. 2 weeks later, Robert successfully passed his private pilot check ride with an FAA examiner. The examiner commended both Robert's flying skills and his thorough understanding of emergency procedures, noting that his experience with medical emergencies had made him a more well-rounded and safety-conscious pilot. "It's unusual to see a new private pilot with such a mature approach to risk management," the examiner told Jessica afterward. "Whatever you taught him about emergency thinking has really stuck." Robert's check ride success marked the official completion of his private pilot training, but Jessica knew their flying relationship would continue. He had already expressed interest in pursuing an instrument rating, and Jessica looked forward to helping him achieve that goal. The experience had also solidified Jessica's reputation as an expert in aviation medical emergencies. She had been approached by the Federal Aviation Administration to serve on a committee developing new guidelines for medical emergency training in flight schools. "You know," Robert told Jessica as they celebrated his new pilot certificate, "I never imagined that the worst day of my flying experience would lead to the best outcomes for both of us. You've built a career helping others prepare for emergencies, and I've gained a deeper appreciation for flying and life in general." Jessica reflected on how the emergency had changed both of their lives in unexpected ways. What had started as a routine training flight had become a catalyst for growth, learning, and positive change that extended far beyond their individual experiences. As the evening wound down, Jessica looked forward to continuing her work in aviation safety education and helping Robert pursue his instrument rating. The bond forged during those critical moments over Meadowbrook had created a friendship and professional relationship that would last for years to come. 2 years after Robert's heart attack, Jessica stood at the podium of the National Aviation Safety Foundation's annual conference, looking out at an audience of nearly 800 pilots, instructors, and aviation professionals. The conference program listed her as the keynote speaker, with a presentation titled "When Seconds Count: Medical Emergency Management in Flight Training." The journey from that frightening moment in the cockpit to this prestigious speaking engagement had been transformative for Jessica. Her medical emergency response training program was now implemented in over 50 flight schools across North America, and she had become a recognized authority on aviation medical emergencies. 2 years ago, I was just another flight instructor doing what I loved, teaching people to fly, Jessica began her presentation. I had no idea that one routine training flight would change not only my life, but contribute to saving other lives across our aviation community. In the audience, Robert and Sarah Chen sat in the front row, beaming with pride. Robert now served as a volunteer instructor for Jessica's MRT program, sharing his perspective as someone who had experienced a medical emergency firsthand. Jessica's presentation included detailed analysis of the emergency sequence, decision-making processes during high-stress situations, and the development of training protocols that could prepare instructors for similar events. She used video simulations and real-world scenarios to demonstrate key concepts. "The most important lesson I learned," Jessica told the audience, "is that medical emergencies in aviation are not just about medical knowledge, they're about maintaining aircraft control, communicating effectively, and making rapid decisions under extreme pressure." After her presentation, Jessica was approached by dozens of pilots and instructors wanting to share their own experiences and learn more about implementing medical emergency training. One airline pilot told her about a situation where a passenger had suffered a stroke during a transatlantic flight, and how Jessica's training protocols had helped the crew manage the situation effectively. The conference also featured a surprise presentation from the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association, recognizing Jessica with their Flight Instructor of the Year award for her contributions to aviation safety education. The award citation specifically mentioned her development of the MERT program and her role in advancing medical emergency preparedness in general aviation. During the awards ceremony, Robert was invited to the stage to share his perspective on the emergency and recovery process. His speech was emotional and powerful, highlighting the human side of aviation safety and the importance of proper emergency training.
Jessica didn't just save my life that day, Robert told the audience.
She gave me the opportunity to see my grandchildren grow up, to continue flying, and to contribute to making aviation safer for everyone. That's the real impact of proper emergency training. It preserves families and futures. The conference marked a significant milestone in Jessica's career, but it also reminded her of how much her life had changed since that emergency landing at Meadowbrook Airport. She had evolved from a local flight instructor to a nationally recognized aviation safety expert, all because of her response to one critical moment.
Following the conference, Jessica returned to Riverside Aviation with renewed energy and several new opportunities.
The Federal Aviation Administration had offered her a position as a safety inspector specializing in flight training standards, and a major publisher wanted her to write a comprehensive manual on medical emergency procedures for pilots. Robert, meanwhile, had continued his own aviation journey. He had earned his instrument rating the previous year and was now working toward his commercial pilot certificate. His cardiac health remained excellent, with annual medical evaluations consistently showing no restrictions on his flying activities. "I want to become a professional pilot," Robert told Jessica during one of their instrument training sessions. "I know I'm starting late at 64, but I want to use my experience to help other pilots, maybe as an instructor or safety pilot for instrument students." The idea excited Jessica. Robert's unique perspective, combining engineering expertise with personal experience of medical emergencies, would make him an exceptional instructor. His mature approach to risk management and safety had impressed everyone who flew with him.
3 months after the conference, Jessica made her decision about the FAA position.
She accepted the role as Regional Flight Standards Inspector, specializing in flight instructor standardization and emergency training protocols. The position would allow her to influence aviation safety on a national level while continuing to fly and teach. Her new role involved traveling to flight schools across the region, conducting inspector evaluations, and implementing standardized training procedures. The MERT program became a central component of her inspector duties, with mandatory medical emergency training becoming a requirement for flight instructor certification renewals.
Robert supported Jessica's career advancement while pursuing his own goals in aviation.
He successfully completed his commercial pilot training and began working part-time at Riverside Aviation as a ground instructor, specializing in advanced navigation and emergency procedures.
The partnership between Jessica and Robert had evolved into something neither had anticipated.
They frequently co-presented at aviation safety seminars, with Robert providing the student perspective and Jessica covering the instructor response protocols. Their presentations were consistently rated among the most valuable and impactful at safety events.
1 year into Jessica's role as an FAA inspector, she received a call that brought back memories of her own emergency experience.
A flight instructor in Montana had successfully managed a medical emergency when his student suffered a seizure during flight. The instructor credited his training in Jessica's MERT program with enabling him to handle the situation effectively. "I kept thinking about your protocols during the whole emergency," the instructor told Jessica during their phone conversation. "The emphasis on maintaining aircraft control first, then addressing the medical situation, probably saved both our lives."
These success stories validated Jessica's belief that proper training could make the difference between tragedy and triumph in medical emergencies. She began collecting and analyzing reports of medical emergencies in general aviation, using the data to refine and improve training protocols. Robert's contribution to this effort was invaluable.
As someone who had experienced a medical emergency as a pilot in command, he provided insights that no one else could offer. His perspective helped Jessica understand how medical events affected pilot decision-making and situational awareness. When my heart attack started, I had probably 10 or 15 seconds where I knew something was wrong but didn't want to admit it, Robert explained during one of their analysis sessions. Understanding that denial phase is crucial for instructors watching for early warning signs. This insight led to the development of improved observation training for flight instructors, teaching them to recognize subtle changes in student behavior that might indicate developing medical issues. The training emphasized that early intervention, even for minor symptoms, was always preferable to managing full emergencies. 5 years after the original emergency, Jessica and Robert co-authored a book titled Emergency Response in Flight Training, a comprehensive guide to medical emergencies. The book combined Jessica's technical expertise with Robert's personal experience, creating a resource that was both authoritative and deeply personal. The book launch event was held at Riverside Aviation, where their journey had begun. The entire aviation community turned out to support them, including many pilots and instructors who had implemented their training programs. During her remarks at the launch event, Jessica reflected on the unexpected path her career had taken. Sometimes the most challenging moments in our lives become the foundation for our greatest contributions. Robert's medical emergency was terrifying, but it led to improvements in aviation safety that have benefited thousands of pilots and passengers. Robert's health had remained excellent throughout the years following his heart attack. He had become a model patient for cardiac rehabilitation and was frequently asked to speak at medical conferences about returning to aviation after cardiac events. His case had helped establish protocols for other pilots seeking medical certification after heart attacks. "Flying saved my life in an unexpected way," Robert often told medical audiences. "Not just because Jessica got me to medical care quickly, but because it gave me a reason to take my cardiac rehabilitation seriously and maintain excellent health habits." The collaboration between Jessica and Robert had also led to romantic development that surprised both of them. 3 years after the emergency, Jessica's marriage to her college sweetheart had ended amicably, and she found herself drawn to Robert's wisdom, determination, and shared passion for aviation. Sarah Chen had passed away from cancer 2 years after Robert's heart attack, a loss that devastated him but also brought Jessica and Robert closer together as friends supporting each other through difficult times. Their relationship had evolved gradually from instructor and student to colleagues to close friends, and eventually to romantic partners. "I never expected to find love at 66, Robert told friends at their engagement party. But life has a way of surprising us when we're open to new possibilities." Their wedding was held at a small airport chapel, with the reception in a hangar surrounded by vintage aircraft. Many of their aviation friends attended, creating a celebration that perfectly reflected their shared passion for flying. Jessica continued her work as an FAA inspector while Robert established his own flight training business specializing in emergency preparedness and instrument instruction. They frequently flew together, both professionally and recreationally, always mindful of the journey that had brought them together. 10 years after the emergency, Jessica was promoted to Principal Operations Inspector for the entire region, overseeing flight training standards across 5 states. Her MERT program had become standard curriculum at flight schools nationwide, and medical emergency response had improved dramatically across general aviation. Robert, now 72, continued flying and instructing with the enthusiasm of someone half his age. His cardiac health remained excellent, and he had become a poster child for successful return to aviation after cardiac events. Their story had been featured in numerous aviation publications, safety videos, and training materials. They were frequently invited to speak at aviation events around the world, sharing their experience and the lessons learned from that frightening day over Meadowbrook. "People often ask if we regret that the emergency happened," Jessica said during one of their international presentations. "The honest answer is that we regret the fear and uncertainty it caused, but we're grateful for where it led us. Sometimes our worst moments become the foundation for our best contributions." The legacy of their experience extended far beyond their personal story. The MERT program had been credited with saving dozens of lives in medical emergencies across general aviation. flight instructors worldwide were better prepared to handle medical crises, and the aviation community had developed a culture of medical emergency preparedness that hadn't existed before. Robert's perspective as a cardiac patient who returned to flying had also influenced FAA medical certification policies, making it easier for pilots with treated cardiac conditions to return to aviation activities. His advocacy work had helped numerous pilots navigate the medical certification process after cardiac events. As they approached the 15th anniversary of their emergency, Jessica and Robert reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought them together and changed both their lives. What had begun as a routine training flight had become a love story, a safety revolution, and a testament to the power of preparation and quick thinking. "I'm grateful every day for that emergency," Robert said during their anniversary celebration. "Not because of what happened, but because of what it led to. It brought us together, improved aviation safety, and reminded me that every day is a gift to be treasured." Jessica agreed, understanding that their story had become larger than their individual experiences. They had transformed a moment of crisis into a legacy of safety, love, and positive change that would continue benefiting the aviation community for generations to come. Their final flight together on the anniversary was peaceful and reflective, taking them over the same route where Robert's heart attack had occurred 15 years earlier. As they flew through clear skies toward their future together, both felt profound gratitude for the journey that had brought them to this moment of happiness and fulfillment.